Last month, President Trump declared a, quote, national emergency concerning the southern border of the United States under the National Emergencies Act. And, my colleagues wanted to talk about the southern border with relation to the opioid crisis, so let's talk about it. Because even at the time that he declared this emergency, he said himself, quote, I didn't need to do this. But he did. And at the time the president declared this emergency, the White House issued a statement that, quote, he would be using his legal authority to take executive action to secure additional resources. And he's transferred millions of dollars even from FEMA to ICE. The statement said that the administration had identified funding that could be transferred from other agencies as well. This includes up to $2.5 billion that he's transferred from the Department of Defense and up to $3.6 billion reallocated from military construction projects. So that's one national emergency he's identified. But about a year and a half ago, the president issued a declaration indicating that opioids also constitute a public health emergency. Director Carroll, today, how much funding has the administration transferred from other agencies to address the opioid public health emergency?
If you're referring to the opioid emergency that was declared 18 months or so ago, very little money was actually transferred over. I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it was not very much money.
Right. We're seeing here, there's evidence that almost no money was transferred from other agencies. So we have two national emergencies, one declared on the southern border where the president transfers and is taking away millions of dollars from other agencies to address a wall, which doesn't even solve these issues when we're seeing that it's focused on ports of entry. But second, when we actually—
May I address that, actually? In terms of if you just go by weight, and I can break it down by drug if you would like, but and the numbers that I have from Customs and Border Protection for 2018 reflects the total weight of drugs at ports of entry in 2018 was 432,000 pounds of various drugs. Between ports of entry for the same time frame, fiscal year 2018, 476,000.
So actually more even.
In terms of total weight, I can break it down by drug if you want.
So here's my big question I want to ask for the other side. Because just a few weeks ago, that enough fentanyl was captured to kill 57 million Americans. Remember this story when this happened? Yeah, just a few weeks back, right?
Yes, sir.
So if that's not an emergency, somebody tell me what is. Enough fentanyl to kill 58 million? 59 million? How bad does it have to get before we actually say this is an emergency? Mr. Carroll, is there a drug crisis emergency on our southern border?
Yes, sir. There's a drug crisis in our country, and all of the drugs that are here are coming into our country. The fatal drugs are coming from overseas, Mexico, China.
I do think that we here in Congress have responsibility as well. The Public Health Emergency Fund has only at most $57,000 in it. And it has not been really funded congressionally in a long time. So I think that that's an area where we can accept some personal responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here and helping us answer the fundamental question of whether we care about our sovereignty and the rule of law in our country. And unfortunately, I have the now cynical view that I'm not so sure we all agree on that we all value the rule of law and value the ability to manage our border effectively. A lot of questions have come up about the humanity of our policies, as they should. There's some rightful anger about family separation. But unfortunately, it's myopic because nobody ever talks about the other issues that we might have when it comes to our humanity. There was a young woman in my office yesterday. She's from Mexico. She's about 18 years old. She was taken across the border, kidnapped about 5 years ago. On the third attempt, because they were turned back twice by Border Patrol, on the third attempt they made it through, and she was brought to New York City where she was raped approximately 30 times a day for 5 years. I don't know why nobody talks about that kind of stuff. When I was at the border in McAllen, in one day, in one location, 16 kids came across with adults that were not their parents. Further questioning and follow-through led to a stash house with 54 people kidnapped inside in Houston. Nobody talks about that humanity. Those are direct results of the fact that our asylum laws are taken advantage of. That's a direct result of the fact that that woman in my office was allowed to walk straight across the border. Nobody stopped her. There's no wall, nothing. Would have been turned back. Otherwise, wise and not been in New York City to suffer the absolute nightmare that she did. And then we get to the question of whether walls work. And this has been a really fun conversation over the last couple months. Do walls work? Madam Secretary, would you agree that there's three parts to security: personnel, technology, and barriers?
Absolutely.
Can you just take one of those away?
No, sir.
When I was down in McAllen and Brownsville, what we see is Brownsville has about 35 miles worth of barriers. And as a result, only 6% of the crossings in that sector take place because walls work. Would you agree with that?
Walls work, yes, sir, as evidence.
McAllen, about 1,000 people were crossing on some days because they don't have the infrastructure. Would you agree that the biggest difference between the McAllen corridor and the Brownsville corridor would be the physical barriers?
The wall system, yes, sir.
Been a lot of red herrings that have been thrown out there to argue these points. Drugs like fentanyl come through points of entry. Yes, we know. You would agree with that, right?
Yes.
Does that have anything to do with the conversation about whether we need barriers between points of entry?
It does not, because it's not an either or.
There's always the conversation about we just need more technology because then the border agents can just chase people around as we see, because we can sense them coming through. Is that the only solution, or do you need that plus barriers plus personnel?
We need all three. We also need the ability to detain and remove when there's no legal right to stay.
There's a point often made that the border crossings are the lowest in years. We had about 400,000 last year, although that's quickly on the rise, as you've noted, 76,000 just this last month. The point is often made that because it's lower than in the year 2000, that there's no crisis. Is that accurate? Is 400,000 a year a low number?
Sir, it's not, but again, if I could, respectfully, it's because of the flow. It's because these are families. It's because these are children. That is why it's a crisis. It's a terrible, horrific journey that they undertake.
And let's get to that. As these arguments are made against points that, frankly, we're not even making, you mentioned the children and why that's the nexus of this crisis. Why does that happen? Is it because of our asylum laws? Is it because of the fact that if you bring a child across the border, well, and I think as you mentioned this before, if you bring a child with you, it's your ticket into the United States. All you have to do is claim asylum. Would you agree that our asylum process is completely taken advantage of?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree that if we were to put more resources at points of entry so that we could humanely bring people in and hear their asylum case, but not let them loose into the country, would that dramatically reduce these illegal crossings as well? Would that be part of the solution as well, to reform the actual asylum process?
Yes.